So, welcome back to More Than a Therapy Couch. I'm your host, Tiana, the podcast where we go beyond the walls of traditional therapy sessions. Today's episode is about how a conversation that doesn't happen nearly enough, men's mental health. In a world that often tells men to man up, stay strong, and keep it all together, we're here to talk about what's really going on beneath the surface. We'll be joined by Ben, Ray, and Jimmy, clinicians from Tree of Life, who work closely with male-identifying clients. Together, we'll explore the pressures men face, the emotional battles they fight in silence, and what it really means to hold space for healing. This episode is about challenging the norms, breaking the silence, and offering new ways to think about masculinity, vulnerability, and strength. So grab your emotional support water bottle, find a comfy spot, and settle in, because this is more than just therapy. As a reminder, the topics discussed are for educational purposes only and are not meant to be taken as clinical advice. If you are concerned about you or a loved one's mental health, consult a mental health professional or call SAMHSA's 24-hour hotline at 1-800-662-HELP. Right. So let's get into everything. So for everyone who's listening, do you think you guys can just introduce yourselves just so everyone knows a little bit about you, and we can kind of go from there? So if Ben, you want to start?
Yeah, so I'm Ben. I was on, I believe, probably the last episode, I think, on parental anxiety. So I've already kind of given my spiel, but I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've been working as a therapist for probably the last 5 years. And really masculinity and getting men in their feelings is my jam. So this is definitely my thing.
Yeah, this is my first podcast, so I'm kind of taking my cues from you on the spiel to do.
We got you.
But yeah, my name's Ray. I'm a licensed social worker. I've been a therapist here at Tree of Life for just about half a year now, and a therapist overall for probably a little over a year, so a little newer to the field. But in terms of men's mental health, I think I'm really trying to work with male-identifying clients in bringing some more emotion and just reflecting more emotion for men, that, you know, everything that they're feeling is okay.
Amazing. And Jimmy?
Oh, hi. So I think this might be my third podcast, and I've been with Tree of Life for roughly 5 or 6 years, give or take. And I've been in the field for 15 years. So I'm an LPC and an LCADC, currently working on my doctorate.
Dr. Jimmy. I call him Dr. Jimmy all the time.
I appreciate that. Not yet, though. And I work with a lot of males or male-identifying clients, and I find the work rewarding. So I appreciate this podcast.
Amazing. Thank you guys for coming on. So if you are listening to this episode, if you yourself are a male, or if you know someone who is a male and is struggling with mental health, definitely send this to them, because they definitely can benefit from what we're going to be talking about today. So I think we should start at the foundation of kind of the beginning, because I think society doesn't make it easy for men in general. So let's kind of talk about what men are taught from the very beginning, and what identifying as a male kind of comes with that as the stereotypes. So let's just talk about the traditional ideas of masculinity and how that affects men's ability to even seek help.
Yeah. So I do a men's group here. We're full right now, which is love it, because more men are, getting in their feels. And, masculinity and just kind of what is masculinity? I have it on the board right there from our group on Monday. We're constantly talking about what is masculinity. I can go on a pretty long spiel about this. So I think I'm going to pass over to Jimmy and Ray first, just because I know that I could probably speak far too long.
Yeah, so currently I'm not running group, but I do have experience in the past running group, especially with men. And one of the themes that comes up is just about being a provider, kind of on some level being in a place where you don't really get much of a range of emotion, especially the vulnerable feelings. So a lot of what is usually expressed is anger. So that's like a recurring theme for most of the clients that I've been seeing so far. And then a lot of emphasis on family, especially like playing that role of provider and also protector.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing that I think of the most when I think of like how we were taught about masculinity is kind of the cliche phrase of, be a man. But I think that when I think of that a little bit more in depth, I like to just sum it up as considering like just being fine generally with everything. So like, if you're stressed because there's difficult things going on at home or there are things going on in the workplace or, there's struggles financially, it's, that doesn't really matter. We're just going to be fine with whatever that is. And we're just going to show to the world in some way that, hey, on the inside, it might feel like things are kind of crumbling in a lot of ways, but I'm just going to show everybody that like, it's just another day. Nothing's really happening that feels significant.
Yeah, that's so in the group a lot we go into like your man box and like what's in your man box. And so the idea of the man box is basically like what boys are taught to be at a very young age. You have to be strong. You have to be the provider. You have to be the protector. You have to be, that hunter-gatherer kind of stuff. And I always joke with the guys in the group and I go like, hey, so why do we not need to be the hunter-gatherers anymore? And they're always like, I don't know, like, it's the world we live in, whatever. And like, I make a very simple joke and I'm like, you can go down to ShopRite and get a steak. You don't need to go hunt for your stuff. We're not living in that world anymore. And so, there's a lot of, I think that there's a lot of stigma around what is masculinity that makes it difficult because every single man has their own interpretation of like what is masculinity. And so, a big thing that I always kind of talk to the guys about is like, and I said this even last Monday, is like masculinity is whatever kind of in your, I guess, kind of area a little bit. It's like masculinity is whatever you want to make it. Like it's whatever you want it to be. There's no right way to be a man, but society tells us there's a right way to be a man.
So going off that, what are some of the things that you guys have seen from your clients that they have been coming to therapy to talk about?
So I know for me, and I think Jimmy nailed it a little bit, is like the anger is definitely like prevalent. Like I think, in this area of like what is masculinity, like I don't know if you guys will agree with me, but like, I think societal masculinity is like angry. And so like a lot of men, like they only know like, whether it's anxiety or anything, they only know anger.
Yeah. I feel like I've seen a lot of, I would say like general apathy in some of the clients that I've worked with, just that like there's a feeling of just being put out by most emotions in a way that just feels like most things I just don't care that much about anymore. And that seems to feel a lot safer than committing to anything. And if it is committing to something, like you were saying, Ben, it's usually anger. And I think that's kind of to your point that like that's what's most accepted. If I'm going to be feeling something, it's going to be that.
Yeah, that acceptance.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with both of you guys. So piggybacking off that, like with the anger, which is generally something, like I mentioned before, that's displayed. And then also the apathy with some of my clients, they talk about like stoicism, but it's probably just like apathy or just like a lot of like repressed feelings. And then I guess at the same time, like when we look at TV and media and a lot of like when you think like actors and in like action movies, and then when you think about anger, it's a lot of like fighting and violence and all that stuff that's portrayed that a lot of males absorb from childhood all the way up until adulthood.
Yeah. Just to add on to that really quick, I was thinking about this, about this topic that we were going to be doing. And I think that point too, just about like what media shows is, and especially in social media too, is that like there can be some messages or messaging or themes around like the male as a character in some way is going to take on a lot of struggle and suffering, but they're just kind of going to take it in stride at the
Yeah,
so, absolutely.
And there's also like, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I see a lot of like this need in like a lot of men that like you have to level up. Like there's always like content is it's almost seen as like a negative.
Right.
Where like you always have to have more. You always have to be achieving something different. I saw I saw the stupidest thing on TikTok. This was the stupidest thing. This like super masculine guy was like, he was talking about how he's achieving more in his everyday life. And I don't know if you guys are on TikTok, you might have seen this. I thought it was hysterical, but I thought it was very stupid. He's sitting there and he's like, well, my day is actually 6 hours. So every 6 hours, you've seen this? Yeah, he's like, every 6 hours, I have a full day. And so, at the end of a year, like, I'm lapping you because, like, I'm doing all this stuff. I have like 3 days and you're 1 day. And there's a guy that stitches the video and he's like laying in bed and he's like, oh yeah? Well, my day is like every 2 minutes. And like, he's making a joke out of it. But he's like, my day's every 2 minutes. So like, how about you? And like, there's such a need to like one up each other instead of like, in the group a lot, I talk about the idea of brotherhood. And that actually we have to be supportive of each other instead of trying, this idea of like leveling up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I think from my personal experience, I've definitely seen that. I feel like as like a woman as well, just I think people in general right now, they're like, well, I want to do this, or they reach the end goal and it's like, okay, now what? Now I need to move that goalpost because I need to do better and I need to do more. And I think even going back to, Ben, we might have talked about this on one of the last episodes, but even going back to like thinking about who we all are. At the end of the day, we're all human, right? And the main things that we need, water, food, but we all, whether we like to admit it or not, we all need connection with other people. And I think society in general, and maybe it's social media, maybe it's society, I don't know exactly what it is, but there's so many people who are like, they're standoffish. And I feel like it's with men, I'm sure it's a lot harder just because of the stigma of what a man should be, quote unquote. But I feel like I've been seeing that a lot lately with just everyone right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I use a quote a lot. Hi, Carl Rogers. The good life is a process, not a state of being. It's a direction, not a destination. Every man is caring about the destination and not the direction that their life is going. Because, if you're happy with the direction that your life's going, then the way that I put it is like when you're like driving on the parkway, right? And like every destination is like an exit. Those destinations are going to keep coming and going. Yeah. It's the direction that really matters. Those destinations, there's always going to be another destination.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit. And from your personal experiences, do you guys have anything that you guys have reflected on as you guys have gotten older about how certain things that you've been told and realizing like, oh, maybe I don't necessarily need to be doing that if I'm a man, or I don't need to get mad over XYZ, or everything needs to be an argument in terms of the stereotypical things that we see, I'm sure, online?
And for me, I would just kind of say getting in touch with like feelings and emotions and just kind of expressing them. Because like when I was younger, just had kind of this fixed face, and it was just like when I look in the mirror, I was like, wow, that guy is angry in the mirror. So I could almost like see how it might deter someone from wanting to connect with me. And then also that kind of creating a sense of like isolation, like, well, why don't I have so many friends now? But then just kind of like seeing that modeled at home, it's just like, wow, this is just how you look, yes, or this is how you need to look. And then ultimately just kind of like, I remember one time I was walking in South Orange Village, and this woman, she was in her car and she just happened to be driving by, and she intentionally pulled up next to me while I was walking, and she was just like, smile. And I was like, oh, okay. Am I okay? Like, what? Well, I was like completely flabbergasted by that. And then it just kind of made me think about it. So then I started smiling and just kind of felt better just walking down the street. So very interesting and just transformative as far as how, I kind of express how I'm feeling.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was a big message for me growing up was I want to say like the idea of like properness in terms of like how you dress, how you get your hair cut, how you carry yourself, the way you talk, and things like that. And, as I that never really felt like that I identify with that very well. It very much felt like I was doing it for my family or to kind of like keep this image of what things felt like at home in some ways. And, as I got older, that sort of became something that got challenged just by people I knew as I went to college or, in different places where, I remember somebody saying like, why not get your nails painted? And I was like, well, no. And they were like, well, who cares? And it's such a simple thing to say, but I was like, yeah, wait, who cares? Actually, it was like such a simple thing that all of a sudden kind of like shifted it for me. And I never would have thought of like wearing rings or jewelry or necklaces or anything like that growing up. I think like the only thing you probably would have caught me with growing up was like the gold necklace I got for like confirmation or something like that. And like, that was it. But I loved it. And I started wearing mala beads and stuff like that when I was in college. And, that was something that I think at the time was like very confusing to like close family or like relatives and things like that, because they were just like, why are you wearing that? What is going on with that? Or like, I would have my nails painted sometimes and they would very much question that and make bigger assumptions about what that meant. And I think for me, it just over time meant that, this is going to make other people uncomfortable. Let me just start to realize that like, this is something that's separate than me, to be able to do. So,
I always joke about how I have a bad poker face because like people are going to see it when you were asking this question because I was sitting here like, yeah. No, my experience with masculinity, I think is definitely a little different than some other men growing up. So I grew up doing theater. So, as a man, like that experience, very, very different because I had people telling me who I was as a man and as a person at a very young age. I started doing theater when I was, I think, like 9 or 10 years old. My first show was a community theater show. Who was afraid of the big bad wolf? I never, who knows, right? But it sticks with you. And, I loved doing that. And I thought it was so cool. And, I would go see my friends when they would like my guy friends, they would do like different sports or different rec or, whatever. And I'd go see them. The struggle to get my guy friends to come support me in a theater show to like come and like, there's such a stigma around that kind of stuff. And so at a very young age, I think I didn't really have a choice but to get like comfortable with like my masculinity and knowing that it's a little different. Because I've always not, I reflect on this a lot as I work with men in that like, I've never really cared about my masculinity. I like, as I look across my life, like really, I've never really cared about that.
Let me ask you something. Why do you think that is? Do you think that it's just because you were in theater when you were younger? Or do you think it had to maybe do with like, I don't know, the society, like your like community, your family? Just curious.
Yeah. I think it's a couple of different things because toxic masculinity lived in my family, but it lived differently than typical toxic masculinity. Because like we were never like a sports oriented family or like exercise oriented. We were much more of an arts family. My dad plays the flute. My mom was an actress. Like we're much more of arts people. But it was very interesting, I think, reflecting on my father because there were never, again, like typical expectations from him about like being a man and like masculinity. There was the typical expectations of like, you have to do really well in school and like, I'm going to be upset with you if you don't do really well in school, if you like try your best or like with performance based stuff. Like, I'm not sure if you guys have seen the movie Whiplash or like heard of the movie Whiplash. So, people don't recognize how like toxic masculinity can live there. And so, for anyone that's seen the movie Whiplash, like, honestly, I think that's where a little bit of the masculinity also comes from. Because when you do theater and when you do the arts, one of the things from like a masculinity perspective that isn't really talked about enough is that like you're constantly being ridiculed. You're constantly being told what you're doing wrong. Hey, you did that dance move wrong. That note was bad. Or like, try delivering this line this way. Or you need to lose this amount of weight for this scene or for this role or whatever. You know, we talk about cutting weight with like wrestling and stuff, but no one talks about like actors cutting weight. Like Christian Bale for one of his, I think it was like Batman and then a movie called The Machine. Where like he went like crazy between the weight of like, it's insane. And so, you know, it wasn't just the societal stuff. I think it was also like the directors that I worked with, because I had a director in high school who was like, he was a mean guy. He was a mean guy. And he had, you know, you would think that we were doing the Tonys and performing on Broadway, and we had to have our stuff together. Like this guy denied us. I got in a fight with him once because we didn't do a scene well on stage or in like dress week, rehearsal week. These are kids in high school. And he wanted to make us skip our pizza like lunch break because we had to go back on stage because he didn't like what we had put on stage. Yeah, and these are a bunch of kids in high school. We'd been there since like 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. So it was like 12 o'clock. And again, it's that idea of like, you got to sacrifice, you got to grind, you got to like struggle, all that other stuff. And like, we got in a huge fight because I'm like, I'm 17 in high school. I'm not a, you know, union actor.
I'm not getting paid to do this.
Like I'm going to take my lunch break and you can kick rocks. And like, that's it. I'm in high school.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I was a big sports player growing up, and that was, you know, all throughout my family too. And I think that I probably would have done better had I had the option at the time to go into like theater or do stuff like that. Because when I found it later, not necessarily theater, but it was like media production, being around people that wanted to act and film and, you know, produce things like that. I found much more in common with those people, even though, you know, I would play this sport and you would say like, you know, you have a quote unquote sense of community with it. I had nothing in common with anybody that I played sports with. So it was always this feeling of like, I wish I could fake it enough to get to have a relationship with these people, but I never could figure it out. I could never fake it enough to get there.
Yeah.
And that was something too that like wound up happening until a point in college where it was like, you know, there's the fraternity and sorority scene. And I remember, you know, being in the process of looking at a fraternity and thinking like, I don't have anything to talk about with anybody. Like there's nothing. And at that point I was like, I think I'm just wasting my time here. And that's when like there was a big transition that happened to be like, okay, well, you know, maybe some of these people don't play sports, but like I could have a 20-minute conversation with you and like we could go somewhere with this and it's more interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I could say for myself, like just piggybacking off of playing sports. So I did play football. My brother was actually, he was, you know, raring to just sign up for the team. And he was like, hey, come along. I want to bring you somewhere. It just happened to be like over the summer. And it was a really like grueling practice for tryouts where, you know, you didn't necessarily need to try out for our high school football team because we were kind of like really bad. And then I did it, and I automatically just resented my brother because it was grueling. I eventually stuck with it for that sense of like community and camaraderie or brotherhood. But then, you know, I started experiencing a lot of anxiety when I started to play and get into the practice, and I could get worried about getting like hit. And like with the ADHD, I was just like constantly thinking about everything and constantly in my head. And then eventually I started adopting sort of this kind of like a class clown or kind of a joker in ways, but just very like withdrawn. And then my coach or one of my coaches would sing this song called like Jimmy Passe and I Don't Care. He, you know, like Jimmy Crack Corn. And it's because I was just kind of very like, I think I was like so dissociated and disconnected that they just assumed that I just was nonchalant or didn't really have any motivation for it. So
and so going off of that, like I think you guys just that triggers something in me because when I think back on kind of like what you guys are describing and I look at like my experience, I had that, like, like I did the sports, I did, I did all that stuff. Like, I think every parent, does with their kid to like, try and figure out like, what's your thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I didn't belong. Like, I knew at a very young age that like, I didn't belong, but like, like I was not the easiest, child. And I was one of those kids that would like ask a lot of whys and like push back a lot and, all that kind of stuff. And so, if I didn't want to do any of those things and I recognized it was because I didn't just like feel comfortable in that environment, I don't think the forcing was there because I would push back against it so heavily that like, guys, I don't know anyone. I'm uncomfortable here. I have nothing, like none of these guys want to talk about video games. Like, I'm going to talk to them about video games. No one here wants to talk about video games. So so one of the things that we were talking about in our men's group a little bit, like even the other day was, I brought up this thing of like how men care greatly about how other men spend their free time because again, beauty's TikTok. But no, I saw this TikTok and it was this guy who's, younger guy. And like, he was recounting this story of like, he went to the gym and he was in the sauna and he was reading a Batman comic book. And some older man came in and like made a comment under his voice. And so this younger guy was like, hey, like, what'd you say? Can I help you? And this older guy was like, why are you reading like that, like kid's book? Like, why are you reading that, stupid kind of thing? And he responded to him with, because it brings me happiness, because it brings me joy. Do you have a problem with that? And, the guy responded to him with like, oh, you'll learn, one day you'll grow up and you'll recognize that like all this stuff is for kids and, all this other stuff. And like, that's what really kind of drove that topic. So I'd be interested to hear kind of like your thoughts on that.
I think it reminds me of something that you mentioned earlier, which was like the idea of breaking down my day into 4 days, basically, with like the 24 hours idea that like, how is everything that I'm doing kind of geared in some way towards building towards a goal or building towards success or improvement in some way, rather than like this just being for the purity of enjoyment and like that being enough. For that clip in particular, it kind of makes me think of like this idea that like, if for somebody else that's like, they've grown up, they kind of let go of some of those things. It's frustrating to see somebody else that's like, hold on to it.
Yeah, no. I mean, I used that as kind of like a pickup point in the group because I asked the guys and I was like, so, and just, for everyone out there, like the group it's a varied group. I'd say the youngest is 26 and the oldest is probably in their mid 50s to late 60s. And, different guys from all walks of life, there for all different reasons. But I asked them all and I said, like, what did you guys do to like manage stress when you were younger? Like you got a bad grade or like you were upset with your parents or, like whatever. And, they'll all say like, go hang out with a friend or go play a video game or watch a show or listen to music or something. And then, I go, okay, I asked them, I said, all right, guys, now I want you to keep your hands up if you still do those things now. And every single hand went down. Every single one. And so, no, I think you make a good point there.
Yeah. I mean, with my experience, especially like, I'm 40, I play video games and I'm probably going to do that till I die. But I do kind of get this sense like from other men of like, well, you still play video games, sort of like a judgment, sort of like it's just like meant for kids. I also kind of get this sense because I was at a bar with one of my friends who came out to visit from Kansas, and the bartender, it was actually at Cheesecake Factory, so, but they have a bar there, and we sat at the bar.
The Cheesecake Bar.
And I was just kind of sitting there with my friend. We were just chatting and talking about stuff, and then the bartender kind of comes and he just starts asking questions about the Knicks game. I'm like, great. I used to watch the Knicks. I was like, great. But then I was like really happy that my friend was there to actually engage in the conversations about the details of it. Because I was like, I can't pick up from there except saying I really like the Knicks. I hope they keep winning, and that's it. And I felt like I was like completely lost at that point. So I felt like I would be judged by the bartender, or they wouldn't speak to me if I just didn't know how to keep up with the dialogue. So that was
Yeah.
kind of
Really
my
good point.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big, I mean, I say the same thing about video games. Like, I'll say to a lot of my clients, like, I'll be in the nursing home playing the PlayStation 6000, like, you know, like whatever it is, like, you know, I'll be there, like, you know, still doing my thing. That's always been truly like a source of joy and like fun for me. And, you know, the way that I put it to a lot of guys when I talk to them about it is, you know, I say to them, you know, I actually think that playing video games actually like, makes me a better person. It actually like makes me an effective clinician. And I say like, you know, if I came home and I didn't have that decompress of like playing video games and all that other stuff, I see a very diverse group of clients, you know, just like you guys do. And if I didn't have that like little brain turn off, like healthy escapism at the end of the day, I don't know if I would be as like geared the next day to like really help my clients.
Yeah, I think that the video games, because I still play video games too, and there's been a lot of
Play your video games,
where-
guys.
If you take nothing else away from this podcast, play video games. But no, I've struggled at different points with thinking like, or I've gotten really close to doing away with video games. There's been like multiple times where I've almost sold all of them, got rid of my console, and thought like, well, there's just better things that I could be doing with my time. And I think it goes to that point that it's like, but do I have to be doing something better also? Like, does it have to be that idea of, you know, how much of my day needs to be like self-improvement to do also?
Yeah.
And I think of that example that you gave too of like, you know, when the Knicks come up or like when sports comes up, it's like, yeah, you know, you mentioned that and I was like, I would be floundering that like, almost immediately because there's only so much that I would know about it. But like, if we had a conversation about like books or about movies or about, you know, video games that are coming up to release or things like that, I could talk about that for a while.
Yeah.
And like, I could go all day, but yeah, I think there is that judgment of like, from other people, it's like, oh, you don't watch basketball? Oh, do you watch football? Oh, you don't watch football?
Yeah, that came up too.
Baseball? And it's like, they start to run down the list in a way that starts to feel like they're pigeonholing you at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you know, what's really interesting as you guys are talking, what's really interesting to me is like, you know, I sat here and I was like, go Knicks. Because like, I'm a huge Knicks fan. I love but the thing is, so like, I'm the theater guy, right? I didn't play sports growing up, but I love watching sports. Like I'm a huge Giants fan. Go Knicks. Like they're 2-up on the Celtics right now. Go Knicks. Like I'm psyched about it. And you know, I do wonder if that's because, you know, since I didn't do those sports, that, you know, I was actually able to kind of like create that authentic relationship with it on my own and get like my own enjoyment out of it in the same way of like video games and like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There is a stigma around video games though. It's very interesting. I use the phrase like toxic productivity a lot to describe kind of what you guys like, this thing of like, we always have to do something of value. This is where I blame capitalism a little bit. But no, because we live in a society where we're told that everything you do has to have value from it. The thing is, we can all sit here and say relaxation is valuable, but it's not tangible. So therefore, we're going to devalue it every single time because we're not getting something.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
We talked a little bit on the last episode, or one of our last episodes. I think people in general don't know how to do nothing. And what I mean by that, I'll share a little short story. My mom got her appendix taken out last week. And she has been out of work for 2 weeks. And she called her boss Tuesday night. She said, hey, you know, I feel like I'm doing good. Do you, can I work from home tomorrow? And I was like, Mom, you do know that like you're sick. Like you could take time off. Like you have sick days for this exact reason. Well, no. And I'm like, what's the point? I'm like, do you understand that? And she was on the phone the other day or 2 days ago, and she, I guess, was talking with her union and everything. And I guess she may lose some of her sick time because she has over 50 days. She's been working at the place for like years. And it's crazy. And she's like, I can't relax. And I'm like, you could do something. And like, you don't have to sit on your phone. You don't have to just scroll on social media and watch TV. I'm like, read a book, go for a walk. There's so many things that I feel like people just don't like see that there's value in doing other things in your life.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I can touch on that a little bit, and I'm not sure if you guys know like the gray divorce kind of like trend that's like kind of come up a little bit.
Yeah.
So this idea of gray divorce is that like there's these like older couples, like boomers, like older Gen X. You're seeing them in increasingly higher numbers as like couples coming into therapy, and you're seeing increasingly high divorce rates. And part of the reason for that is because these people are growing up and, as they go through life with raising kids and their career and all this other stuff, they're sacrificing everything to taking care of their kids and their career and all that other stuff. So when they become empty nesters and they retire and all this other stuff, they're sitting on the couch and they're looking at the other person next to them and recognizing that they have no idea who the person is that they're sitting across from because they've got like nothing in common. And they have no idea how to like spend time together or like hang out together or anything like that. And, I do see that as like definitely a big man kind of problem because again of that, that be the provider, be the, it's almost like masculinity, or at least the societal expectations around masculinity is that you can't relax, that you can't slow down.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree. I barely take vacations or PTO or anything like that. I do have a vacation coming up soon, but ultimately I don't take that many.
I feel like it reminds me of that idea of like, I don't even know if this is actually a true thing, but like if a shark were to stop swimming, it just like, it's not like it just sinks basically. Like, or if you were to stop swimming and doing something. I don't know if that's actually true. I may have just made that up.
Don't find that.
Don't fact check this. But I think it is that idea of like if we're not swimming or like doing something in some direction, that it's like, I think it's also a fear of like, well, then what would happen if I stopped doing it?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I think that's a good point.
I think about it a lot, and I talk with clients about like we often conflate our like own sense of self-worth with like what we're putting out into the world and like the tangible things that we can see for that. So like this job makes me valuable, this relationship makes me valuable, how I've contributed to my friends' lives make me valuable. These awards and things that I've gotten make me valuable. But what about just you as yourself in a place? How does that make you valuable too? And that like, I think people I think especially for men too, like it's hard to see that because a lot of how that is defined, like you were saying too, is by, what amount of money you're bringing in every month, or, how you're taking care of your family, or, if you're staying in shape and things like that, define value in a lot of ways.
Going off the idea of you always have to be doing something. You always constantly have to be, overachieving and doing the most. Do you think that some people may do that so that they don't have to think about what they should be thinking about, or like reflecting on things that they maybe don't want to reflect about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, going off the conversation about like being this perpetual motion machine, constantly doing something. And then when a client, male client even, just kind of comes into the office and it's just like, oh, it's just you and me. And we're taught, basically, we're trained as therapists, we're not going to do all the work. So there may be this open-ended question, there may be silence that you have to be comfortable with. And then the client's there just sort of like sometimes trying to usher you in or ask you to kind of fill that air. And then in those kind of moments, that's where like the anxiety comes in. That's where you might see some of the anger or, the why am I here's kind of deal. And in that kind of space, I could see that, this whole idea of being comfortable with discomfort starts to become very daunting for a lot of clients.
Yeah, I use like, how do we get comfortable with the uncomfortable, like over and over and over with my clients. I'm always like being uncomfortable. I think that goes a little bit into an area of like escapism, and like, we always kind of like we poo-poo escapism in like different areas. Like if you play, so I'll go back to video games, right? So like if you stay at home and you play a video game all day to avoid whatever feelings, whatever's going on in your head, that's bad. But if you avoid everything going on in your head by getting up and going to the gym and then going to work and then meal prepping and then doing another thing and then doing another thing after that, well, that's healthy escapism. That's good escapism. When in actuality, like, is it? Because at the end of the day, like, anything taken to an extreme is going to be an extreme.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to what you said for a second, because I liked that comment that you made about, like, when there is silence in the room, it's kind of about
the conversation can shift to, well, what is this about? Why am I here?
Like that. And I think that some of the ways that I've seen some male clients or male identifying clients show up in therapy is in a way that's really comfortable with getting coping skills or coping tools that are, like, actionable to take from therapy, because it kind of feeds back into that idea that we're talking about of, like, this is something I can do and this is something I can, like, put into my life in a way that I will see the results of. And I really love working with DBT skills. So a lot of it is like, well, what if we didn't do anything though, and just, like, sat with that? And that can be something I think sometimes that gets a lot of pushback. And I understand too, because it's like, well, do nothing. What do you mean do nothing? But
I have to be doing something.
But I think that can be, like, one of the challenges where it's not necessarily about, like, doing something or changing something or adding or subtracting something. It's just about, like, existing with what is, because it might not be able to change right now or next week or in 3 months. So like, how can we just get more okay with that?
Yeah. A lot of men are, like, very task oriented and, like, goal oriented. And so, you know, even in that area of, like, that awkwardness, because, like, I think, you know, again, as men, like, that's something that as, like, male clinicians, we can definitely kind of, like, I don't know, notice or kind of, like, point out a little more, because it is a little bit of, like, a man thing. And, you know, I'm always big on, like you say, like, those T skills. Like, I go into, like, using assessments with a lot of guys during those times. Like, you know, they'll be like, oh, my life is fine and all this other stuff. And I'll pull out, like, the adverse childhood experiences assessment. And, you know, when I go through that and they ask yes or no questions about, like, did you grow up in a household with, like, a problem drinker? Did your family act close, or were they, you know, like, very distant? It makes it much more tangible. And then they kind of sit there and they're like, oh man, maybe I do have things to work on. Like, maybe it is more than, like, a skill, or, like, you know, maybe there is, like, a whole change. And, like, I don't know about you guys, like, men are very hard with the idea of, like, change in therapy. They can do the skills, but I found that, like, the idea of, like, changing who they are is a very unattractive really concept to them.
I definitely kind of get that. I like to talk with clients about the difference between therapy and psychotherapy. Like, with the therapy, you know, you're just kind of going through, like, skills and techniques and just kind of ways to cope, which for a lot of male clients, it makes whatever's happening fixable. Like, I can fix it. They want to fix everything. And as far as, like, with the psychotherapy, I explain, well, this is about gaining insight, awareness, about knowing, about understanding, you know, seeing what's the source of what's happening or what's going on. We're just kind of dealing with the symptoms and looking at that in terms of, like, the difference between, like, the content or what's discussed and then the process, like, what's going on, like, what's happening, feelings, all that stuff internally, like, what are you thinking? What are your fears? Which sometimes, again, we can only really identify when we stop moving and, you know, you start smelling the roses, so to speak.
So one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier, Ben, you mentioned you mentioned the idea of if someone were to kind of stay home all day and just play video games versus if someone were to wake up, go to the gym, go to work, and do something to keep their mind busy. Can we just talk a little bit about how the role of substance use, perfectionism, and avoidance can be used as also coping and avoiding certain thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I always say that humans always struggle with overcorrecting. And, like, that's why a lot of people come into our office, because they're stuck on overcorrecting and they need help trying to find, like, what that middle ground is a little bit. And, you know, I say that because, again, like you said, and like we were discussing earlier, if you have someone that stays home all day and plays video games, they're wasting their life. They're boring. They're a loser. All that other stuff. But if someone is avoiding their anxiety, depression, whatever's going on in their life by, waking up, going to the gym, going to work, making dinner, and like just kind of grinding, that's seen as like healthy escapism. But if you're constantly living in a place of escapism, it doesn't matter what you're doing, my opinion, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's a hobby or an activity or avoidance or anything like that, the thing doesn't matter. What you're doing doesn't matter. It's how much you're doing it. And if you're constantly living in that state of escapism, then, you're just constantly living in avoidance and like not working on anything.
I think one of the things that I'm thinking about with that is I think that goes to perfectionism and avoidance. It's kind of like two sides of the same coin in a way.
Yeah.
Because when I think of that example you gave of like, I'm going to the gym, I'm meal prepping, I'm, focusing on my nutrition, I'm getting good sleep and all of these things, but nothing is kind of like left outside of that. It's like I'm shooting for perfection in like the routines and the structure of my life, but I've left out huge components of it.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes when I will talk with clients about that, they'll feel like very, very frustrated by that and kind of like at their wit's end because they'll be thinking like I'm doing everything that I feel like I'm supposed to be doing. And I feel like there's nothing else to kind of figure out here. So why do I still feel this way?
Yeah. I could sit here and talk about expectations until, like the cows come home. But like at the end of the day, like I think it's a big expectations thing because again, like in masculinity, it's like, you've got to go to the, you saw, what was that trend that was going around of like the guy with the sparkling water in like the bowl and like every morning, he's like, I do this every morning and like he's getting up at like,
that.
I just saw this guy. It's like 3 a.m.
Yeah, he gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was talking about this with a client the other day because like he gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't think like realistically his day starts like really needing to do things until like 9. Yeah. And I'm like, don't get me wrong, like going to the gym and everything in the morning is like healthy. Like I'm not gonna knock that. It's healthy, but like do you really need to be up that early and like fill every second hour of your day? But again, I think it goes back to like the tangibility. And, like if you go to the gym, you see the physical outcomes that come from that. So you feel healthier. But if you stay and play a video game, again, there's no, outcome from that unless like you play like, we all play video games. So like, unless you play like Dark Souls or like something, because then that's like, so Dark Souls is a very difficult video game where it's like very punishing and like, you have to learn. No. So I was reading a really interesting article for a lot of men, actually, as I forgot where I read this, but there was some clinician that was talking about using like Dark Souls and like Elden Ring and those kind of games to help men learn and accept failure. Because those really games, like you die so many times over and over and over. And like, you really have to slow down, like learn the fight, like learn the mechanics, like, and like at the end of it, you get that same feeling of accomplishment as if like you put in like a really good pump at the gym. Yes. There's just no value in that because it's like, I beat the boss. Yay. like,
Yeah. I definitely, just piggybacking off that, I like to use just a lot of like connections, like even like with video games. Because like, even what you were talking about in the gym, like if you're just constantly going to the gym, but you don't have rest days, then you don't really like improve. You don't benefit from it. You're just constantly tearing your muscles apart, basically.
Right. Or they talk about like plateauing in the gym. Like if you're doing the same routine over and over and over and over and over, eventually you're not going to get anything from that pump or that workout or whatever because those muscles aren't being challenged anymore. You're just doing the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I was talking with this client who also just happens to play video games. And we're going over something, but I forgot exactly what that topic was. But it's something that he just kind of kept on focusing on. And I talked about like a really challenging game that I was playing that I was just getting like obliterated and having like many deaths. and I told him like, I put it down. I walked away from the controller.
Yep.
And then I turned back to the game after a while and it was like I could see all the patterns and how to beat the boss and to be successful. And And I was like, well, hey, you could turn this around and use this in, again, like whatever issue that he was actually dealing with in session. So it really made a lot of sense. And I like making the connection, especially if one of my clients likes video games.
Yeah. And, I think that like, all of this stuff is escapism, like avoidance, all this other stuff. It's men engaging in escapism because I think a lot of men just don't know how to deal. Like a big topic that we talk about in men's group is like neutrality being positive. Like when there's nothing going on in your life, like we always kind of see that as like a negative when it's like, hey, if nothing's going on, like that phrase, no news, good news, like,
Yeah.
Can't neutral like be kind of good? Like, can't that be a healthy state of living?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first, I feel like I have to learn something from the video games thing now because I got Elden Ring and I died like 10 times in a row immediately. And then I was like, I'm just never going to play that one.
Oh, so you just got it. I mean, come on. There's a
I think I need to turn back.
Well, there's a little bit of maturity there. I think with we do have a couple of years on you, so maybe there's like a little bit of like elder gamer kind of
might be going on
there a little bit.
But one of the things that I was thinking about, and I think a lot about how media plays into some of these things, especially with the gym, because you mentioned that guy that you saw that he's doing an ice bath for like 3 a.m. in the morning. He's working out. He hasn't started his day until 6 hours later. I think that gives sometimes the impression with media surrounding fitness culture that like it's not okay to be the guy that's there 2 times a week in the gym.
Yeah.
Doing whatever you're doing, working machines and leaving. You can't, it's not okay. You have to be the guy that's 5 a.m. in the morning. You're there 6 times a week. You are pushing it to your absolute limit and then going home. I just think that stands out to me.
No, and what's interesting is I think that's actually kind of like, at least from what I've noticed, kind of like a recent change. Because I've, being a video game guy and like theater guy, I've always had a weird relationship with like going to the gym and like that's always been like but like that's where there's been like a masculinity anxiety because I'm not man enough to, like go to the gym, right? But I did get past that because there was a time where I was going to the gym really regularly and like I was, like 250 pounds or something. And, I noticed that like everyone there was more or less supportive. Like even if I was kind of struggling a little bit, like no one was really looking at me. No one was kind of giving me shit. And it's definitely, I feel like what you're describing is definitely, again, kind of like a recent change, like over the last couple of years with like all this like manosphere stuff and like Joe Rogan show. Like I personally absolutely hate the Joe Rogan show from like a masculinity perspective. You guys are fans of it. I hate it because it's not like we're not like God. We don't know everything. But we have all these people that are doing these podcasts about what it means to be a man when like they don't know what it means to be a man. And like it's not that like we know what it means to be a man because we're male therapists and we're more in tune with our emotions and all that other stuff, but we're gentler, we're kinder, and there aren't enough masculinity voices out there like that. Where like the podcast we're having right now is about like encouraging and like strengthening men to be more vulnerable and all that other stuff. What we're not doing is sitting here and going, "Hey guys, if you do this, then you're gonna get X amount of partners, and you're gonna get really, really rich and all this other stuff." We're not saying if you do this, you'll be this kind of man. And I think that's really like a big part of this.
Yeah, kind of chasing that promise. Or false promise.
Yeah. False promise, definitely.
Well, I think right now is just a good time to take a quick little break. We're going to take a moment for our sponsors. And when we get back, we are going to talk about safe spaces and what that looks like for you guys being therapists with the clients that you guys are bringing in to your sessions. So we will be right back. Feeling stuck mentally and physically? It may be time to supplement your self-care practices with some holistic healing options. Mind the Body Holistic Wellness in Freehold, New Jersey proudly offers a variety of healing modalities including Reiki, massage therapy, reflexology, and Himalayan hot stone massages. For more information or to book an appointment, visit www.freehold.com. www.mindthebodyhw.com. Now back to our show. All right, and we're back. So when talking about creating safe spaces, specifically in your sessions, what do you guys do to help create safety and trust specifically with your male clients?
I mean, I think something that I've found can be useful in creating safety, depending on the age, I think, of the clients that I'm working with, can be using self-disclosure at times, like telling stories about things that are going on with me where like I felt certain emotions as a way of just kind of reflecting for my clients that this is okay to feel some of these things. I think that, if it's teenagers that I'm seeing, I might talk about, I might tell a story or talk about a time that I felt something around the same age as them as a way to get a conversation going about something. I find that has helped to form a little bit of like camaraderie together, that like it's not just me asking you questions about these vulnerable things. It's like I'm also here and I'm going to show you that I can do this with you.
Yeah, no, so I'm also on that because I use a decent amount of self-disclosure with a lot of my male clients, and like that's such a hot button issue in the therapy world. But like, I feel like that's more of like an old school like hot button issue, because like I know that we're both not sitting there like putting the responsibility to make us feel better when we share one of these stories, like on the client. Like if I share a story from like high school or something that happened, like I'm not, going like, oh my God, it was so traumatic. And like, it still lives with me like to this day. I think that self-disclosure is really good for a lot of men because like it helps you see like, hey, I'm human. I'm still figuring it out too. Like I'm not, I'm not perfect. Like I'm not the gold standard. And again, this goes back to like kind of the Joe Rogan stuff that like, I'm not the gold standard of men. Whereas a lot of these men in the manosphere of like podcasts, they act like they're like the gold standard and they act like they have it all together. I don't have it all together. The other side of it is also like I say to a lot of my male clients, like, so for anyone out there, I don't know if you know this because you're not in this office. I know you do. I have a Nintendo 64 in my office. I have a PS2 in my office. I have AlbumWorks up in my office. I've got some gamer RGB kind of lighting in my office. Because, I found that if my main clientele is going to be kind of like emotionally unavailable men, I have found that kind of making it feel like almost like broing out in a way makes it much easier for them to kind of like plop on the couch and just start like word vomiting.
Yeah. I could definitely appreciate that. And I do use self-disclosure, like with discretion, like when it kind of feels like it's, great timing, and also like to create a sense of comfort and safety. I also kind of just admit like when I make mistakes.
That's a big one.
Yeah, I definitely like to do that. I'll kind of come in and, I'll have my coffee. Admittedly, I'll say, hey, sometimes I do need that pick me up. I'm fallible. I'm human, just like you were talking about. And I guess like most times, like even if I have a brain fart, if I was talking about an intervention or trying to give feedback, I'll just admittedly say that versus like stumble and try to like come up with something to create this sense that, I don't make mistakes.
Yeah, I'll sit there and just be like, well, I'm sorry, the train has left the station. like the thought sometimes can just like, it's just gone.
It's so funny. So many people, I think, forget that like you guys are also human too. Like the same way like they may have ADHD and are coming to therapy, your therapist may also have ADHD or like anxiety or depression. Like you're not the only person. Just because they're carrying it well doesn't mean that they're necessarily their life is picture perfect.
Right.
But through your sessions and through having through speaking one-on-one with your clients, what have been some common hesitations from male clients about either starting therapy or about even opening up?
So I terminated this couple recently, and this is one of those gray divorce couples that, I'm talking about. Now, naturally, I don't bring up, when I do couples therapy, I don't go like, hey, I think we should get divorced. Hey, like we should, like, that's not what you're here for. That's not what I'm doing. With this couple, the main struggle that we were running into, and this guy was probably in his mid to late 50s, was that like he didn't want to change. He didn't see the value in changing. He didn't understand that he needed to change. I think masculinity has a little bit of a different connotation by generation, because a lot of the older generations get very much, why should I change? I've lived this way my entire life. Like, it's gotten me all this stuff. Like, why should I change? And I think a lot of them struggle with recognizing like what a healthy life actually is, and that living a healthy life is actually valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. Considering like a lot of male clients are even like avoidant of going to like doctor's appointments or being mindful of like their physical health. And as far as like with therapy is concerned, over time, over generations, like the idea of therapy has also changed. Like more people are involved in it. While at the same time, if like I have a client who was in therapy, he's like in his 60s now, but he was in therapy like when he was much younger. So depending on that experience, you know, it kind of colored his view of therapy. Yes, he's found himself back in, but it just kind of seems like there's a lot of work that he has to do, especially just kind of getting adjusted to therapy at that age.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I consider for some of the male clients that I work with when they're first coming in, I think this can be like an apprehension that that can come up sometimes, is that like the idea of coming to therapy in the first place sometimes for some of my male clients feels like it's a failure in some way in their life, and that's kind of what led them to being in the room talking with me. It's like something broke down and failed, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't do it on my own. And I think that a lot of the conversation that we have is around to empowering them, that everything that is going to be happening from here, that, you know, I try to put a lot of emphasis on like, hey, you know, I think the conversations that we have and the insight that we might be able to build in here will be valuable in some way to you. But like once you leave here, I'm not going to be like driving around in your life, like trying to reinforce what you're doing and like checking in on you while you're at home and things like that. Like, you are going to be the arbiter of change in your life for whatever that looks like. And everything that happens has everything to do with you. So I try to make my clients aware pretty quickly too, that like, it wasn't a failure that led them here. I don't really like the use of that word, because they're capable of so much and capable of growing and evolving into whatever they see for themselves. It's maybe just that they never had access to or knew about some of the things that we would go on to discuss and talk about.
Yeah, and I think it's just the vulnerability just in general. It's like, it's just like a huge barrier, because like, I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, but the Netflix version, the Netflix one. So I kind of love the Netflix one, but Van Ness has, I don't know, he's got a little drama going on about him. But no, they did an episode that I use a lot in therapy. There's a clip I take from one of their episodes, because they like transformed like an undergrad like fraternity.
Oh,
I've
seen it.
Yeah. And they have one moment where there's one guy, Karamo, who's like known as like the culture guy, but he's also, I believe, a licensed social worker. And he more or less does like a group therapy session with all the guys. And one of the things that they talk about is how men are just in general not encouraged to have those conversations with each other. They're not encouraged to like open up their feelings and like talk to each other about their feelings and like, how are you doing? And they all reflected on like, no one really asked like, how are you doing? And, you know, I think it's that vulnerability. And again, those expectations around masculinity that a lot of guys I ask, like in general, when they first come in. So like, just what are your thoughts on masculinity? Because like that in itself will kind of tell me like where I'm starting with you in regard to the therapy process and like all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Piggybacking off what you were saying, Ray, of like normalizing that all clients, before they even come to therapy, they try to exhaust all resources, anything that they could do in order to resolve their problem and or issue. And then when they come into therapy, it's like just like what they talk about like in 12 steps. You're just kind of admitting that you're powerless, which can be really hard for men especially. But then, you know, when they come in and, you know, this whole part about the insight building and, you know, from a strengths approach is trying to like not necessarily give you everything that you need, all these skills, but it's just kind of harness what's already there inside of you. But, you know, in order to do that, you have to be vulnerable. You have to let someone in. And that kind of goes like with the trust. And so I could see like the transformation like over time as clients just let you in. And then, things just start coming out that they've never experienced before.
Yeah.
I was thinking of something that you said, Ben, about a clip from where it reminded me of something that I remembered from a movie I've seen. It's called Waves. It's an A24
Love A24.
and Waves is it's a great movie. It's an intense movie too, but it just deals with like the struggles of a family. And there's a moment in the movie where this father, he's just talking with his daughter, and they're like kind of checking in together, and he's saying like, "How are you doing?" And she's just kind of like very passively saying like, "I'm fine." And I feel like when we're checking in with people, kind of like you were saying with the fraternity guy that was checking in with people, like I feel like sometimes it kind of stops there with men where it's like, "I'm fine. All right, good." And then we just kind of moves on. And what he does in the movie, which always resonates with me, and it's like a really simple thing, but he just is like, it's okay if you're not. And the conversation moves a little bit further from there, that like nothing really comes from it at first, but it allowed for there to be a little bit more openness where they eventually get into a really deep conversation together. It's a really emotional thing that they just like unload a lot of stuff that's built up over the course of the movie. And I think that when I do see some of my male clients showing that like, hey, it's okay that I'm feeling this, it's okay that I'm hurt right now, I try to really celebrate that in ways by the end of our sessions or like checking back in the next session. Something I like to say a lot, just because I feel like it's not a hurt statement that much, is, hey, I'm really proud of you. I feel like we don't really hear I'm proud of you that much. And so, a lot of times when we're kind of like winding down, or like if we're picking back up in a new session, I'll just be like, hey, I just want to let you know I was really proud of the way you showed up last session and things like that.
Yeah, I do that. I do that with clients. I think the team will all shake our heads. I think we're all like, I always joke with clients, and I'm like, so, when I say I'm proud of you, I'm not saying it because I'm your therapist and you pay me money to make you feel good. I say this because it comes from my observations. It comes from what I've seen happening with you in these sessions. And so, I consider it, like such a privilege to be able to walk this journey with you, because like I see where you were at when you first came in, and I see where you're at now. And like, that's why I'm saying I'm proud of you, because I've seen it. I've seen that change.
Yeah.
I love that you guys all mutually agreed and said that you guys say that to your clients. Because one, I think people, like you guys said, people in general don't hear that enough. And I think a lot of people think, again, this is just stigma around mental health and stigma around therapy in general. They just, some people think that, well, because I'm coming to therapy, I got diagnosed with something. Or again, there's something wrong with me. Or I shouldn't be doing this. You don't like have to have a diagnosis. You don't have to have something wrong, quote unquote, with you. It could literally just be like, you're going through a lot of stuff right now and you need someone to talk to.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. For your clients that are coming to session, if they are looking to grow their emotional intelligence, where would you suggest that they start?
So for me, like when I'm working with my clients, I like to use just like a feelings check-in. So in the beginning, like when they say like they're fine or okay, and I tell them, well, it's usually or typically in response like, well, how you're doing, or it's like a default response. And then ultimately it kind of also shuts down the conversation or the connection. Whereas like if you let someone know how you feel, then they may have like a feeling about that. Like they may be able to identify with that feeling, or they might feel concerned, and men don't want you to feel concerned about them. They need to feel strong. And a lot of times when I initially just do like, how you're doing. And then I'll say, okay. And then I'll say, well, okay, well, how are you feeling? I feel terrible. And I'm like, well, do you see the difference? Do you see the difference there? So that's where I usually like try to start with like just the feelings check-in.
Yeah.
And then during those moments where, I might ask a question or I might notice a change in like their affect, I'll just ask like, well, what came up for you, or what just ran through your mind or something like that. And usually that just kind of, evokes more feeling.
I'm with you on the feelings a lot because, you know, a lot of the men that originally come into my office, they're definitely lacking, you know, a decent amount of that emotional intelligence, again, through no fault of their own, you know, societal expectations, cultural things, whatever. Um, there's very much, I say to them a lot, I get this frustration of like, I can't manage a feeling. And I always say to them, well, you have to be able to identify the feeling first before you can manage it. Because if you don't know what you're feeling, how can you do anything about that feeling?
Yeah.
You have to learn the feeling first. So I'm a big like feelings wheel guy, or like, if you guys know feelingswheel.com, feelingswheel.com. No, and I do it with a lot of my male clients, and they'll sit there and they'll, you know, like, I don't want to use this feelings wheel, like, you know, but I'll be like, dude, I use it myself sometimes, like when I don't even know what's going on, just to help me kind of figure out what's going on inside myself. And, you know, and then they'll go to the wheel and we'll start going through the wheel, and like, you know, they'll start off saying they were angry about the week, but then that angry turns down into like 9 out of 10 times it's normally frustrated, because anger is normally frustrated about something. But if they say like, oh, I had an okay week, like even okay can actually break down to, like you said, terrible. Okay can break down to, you know, like depressed. Like there's so many different things, but we get stuck in this catch-all feeling of like fine that's supposed to like mean everything.
It fills space for like, if I'm not good, then I'm bad. You know, in agreement with both of you that I also really like to have some work on just like mind-body connection things too. So like if somebody does mention, you know, today was a really bad day, or today was a really hard day, I was really overwhelmed, I'll often like spend a bit of time talking about that, but also like, what does that feel like physically? Where are you feeling overwhelmed in your body right now? I think that that's just kind of a good way to start to bring some of that awareness also to the feelings wheel, like you're saying too, of like, if I can start to identify what these different emotions feel like physically for me, like how excitement might be different from anxiety, might be different from surprised or overstimulated, which all have things I think that can feel really closely related at different points. I think it's useful to just give a little bit of delineation to what anybody's feeling in a given moment, and also just making themselves more aware of like how their physicality has changed at different points too from them.
Absolutely.
Talk on a lot of male clients about this idea of like finding your peace. And like when I talk about finding your peace, it really means kind of like sitting with stillness, because so many men struggle with stillness, and you need that stillness. You know, this goes into what we were talking about earlier about like when you're running around with your day and doing 9 million different things, really you're just kind of engaging in escapism, and you're not like checking in with yourself. And, you know, a lot of these men, they struggle with the idea of like, just like, hey, why don't I just take a second, actually just like check in physically, mentally, like, how am I feeling? What's going on?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As therapists, how would you guys suggest a male client react in a healthy way if they are noticing something's coming up for them? Or what would you suggest that they do if they're recognizing that they're feeling a lot of emotion in their body, but they don't know what to do?
Yeah, I got you. So I'm a big action absorbs anxiety kind of person. And so, you know, I'm a big like, hey, if you're, you know, let's say I was talking with a client yesterday and his son, and he just, you know, struggles with managing that anger a little bit. And so we've been talking about like going downstairs and hitting the bag, because he's got, you know, he's got a bag downstairs. And, you know, like instead of just, he would kind of sit and stew in those feelings and just try and like push through the problem in kind of like, even like what you were saying about like with the video game, where like, you know, I couldn't beat the game, so I put it down, I took that second, and now I'm coming back. It's that taking a second. That's a huge part. A big area from OCD work. There's an article called like 5 Steps Towards Brain Lock. And one of the things that they identify, because, you know, again, with OCD is you're just obsessing about that thing, whatever it is, over and over and over and over and over. One of the things that they talk about is doing something different for 15 minutes, because, and pulling yourself completely away from whatever it is that you're focusing on, whatever it is, pulling, you know, yourself away to go do that other thing. because it can take about 15 minutes to get your brain to kind of like reset on whatever thing you're focusing on, worrying on, feeling, whatever. And so, yeah, a big thing is just action absorbs anxiety, whether it's hitting the bag, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's just taking a second and listening to a song. Maybe it's playing a video game for like 10 minutes just to pull yourself out of whatever was going on.
I guess as far as like the expression of feelings, I agree as far as like doing some kind of movement or physical activity, hitting the bag, just to kind of like get it out. I do feel like there is a benefit to, being able to sit and sort of like build a relationship with those feelings, identify them, kind of like that movie, like Inside Out, so to speak.
Yeah.
I still haven't watched it, by the way. I just keep hearing about it, so it's
You got it,
shame on me.
Like,
But when it comes to just like being able to sit with and then build a relationship, and I talk a lot about how like some clients will kind of like view some of their most uncomfortable feelings as like uninvited guests. So how we treat uninvited guests, we might ignore them. We might look out the window to see who they actually are. And we might just not want them to return, yet they still kind of keep coming back. Like they want that recognition. And then a lot of clients also have a tendency to struggle with articulating it, want it to sound perfect. And I just tell them, stumble through it, say it terribly, and then we could work from there.
I'll always say, like, it's my job to figure it out. You put it together. It's my job to try and figure out what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love that. Yeah, I think of some things kind of along the lines that I think you're saying too, that like, let's take a step back from this for a moment and try to put ourselves in like this impartial observational perspective of things. I try to work with my clients on like mindfulness and meditation as a way of starting that, to say like, okay, this is really frustrating right now. Where am I, like, do I feel my fist getting tighter? I'm like, okay, anger's here. What is that feeling like? Do I feel myself getting hotter? What do I want to do right now? That's interesting. But not necessarily having to like act on it in this moment in a way that might be regrettable later or have more consequence than I wanted to. And I really like that analogy that you give about like house guests. I think I use that in a different, like a slightly different way than you do, but I really like it a lot of like, if I'll often say like, let's keep an open door policy for the emotions that we're feeling so that like they can come and go as they please. But if we shut the door, then everything that is in the room is staying in the room. So we're just kind of stuck with it. And I'll say like, I think a lot of times when we're trying to get away from something or distract ourselves with something, we are shutting the door and we just don't even really know that that's happening.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Ben, one of the things that you mentioned that you try really hard to do in your men's group is create kind of like a brotherhood. So could you guys talk a little bit about how race, cultural background, and religion can impact men's mental health and even just the stigma of men focusing on their mental health?
Yeah. So brotherhood is a phrase I use a lot in my men's group because when I talk to them about brotherhood, I say brotherhood is about supporting. Like healthy masculinity is being there for each other. And to be able to do that, you have to actually really get to know the other man, so to speak, that's sitting next to you and understanding, really having a good understanding of them. Because I have men of different ages, different cultures, different political beliefs, different races, religion, all that other stuff in the group. And so, I am thinking about that as I, bring a topic into the group or whatever. And, I think it's a combination of like a little bit of like, I would say an everyday world for like men, it's just like education. I say psychoeducation, but really just education. I had a friend say to me once, and it like changed my life. He said to me once, you have to stop assuming that everyone thinks the same way that you do. And I was like, ooh, yeah, you got me, buddy. Okay. But no, it was really helpful because, that's changed a lot of ways that I kind of view the world now. And, some men, we have such individual experiences that like you may not be familiar with a culture, you may not be familiar with a religion, and so you may not know what kind of expectations are there. You know, I have a client that I'm working with right now who is originally from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about his masculinity is, you know, it's definitely a push and pull kind of conversation, because I have to take the cultural beliefs and the religious beliefs into consideration when we talk about, you know, what it means to be a man and all of that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And really interestingly enough, you know, we have a new pope. So I bring this up because I was reading an article yesterday on some of his beliefs, and, you know, he was getting a little bit of flack for some of his LGBTQ beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
When you read a little deeper about it, it's actually a little more complicated. And, you know, I'm a huge ally. I will, you know, I have tons of clients in the community. I am a huge ally. But when I listened to what he was saying, it made a lot of sense. And he was talking about how for the church, when they talk about the acceptance and inclusivity of like LGBTQIA plus people, that it needs to be a conversation from like clergy location to location, because a lot of the priests in Africa were saying that like we could get killed for preaching this, because like a lot of our culture and a lot of our religion, like for you to be gay or anything like that, like it's against the law. And so, you know, I think we try to make a lot of these things, and like masculinity in itself, we try and make it a simpler concept,
More general, yeah.
when it's much more complicated, and it's to the person.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. Just in terms of like the nuance too of what his opinion on that wound up being overall. I think that the way that I've seen, I would say like religion mostly, in terms of like my practice right now, has been that I think that for a lot of people, and I think, you know, this has been one of the really great benefits of religion, is that it gives a lot of people a really strong sense of community with people that they relate with. It helps keep families, you know, together at times. I mean, I know it can be, you know, a challenge for families as well, but I think one of the things that I've seen in terms of like how it shows up in my practice is that it can also be something that gets a little slippery with like how you're supposed to do things, or like how you ought to be acting and doing things. And I think that I've seen that with some of my clients that have talked about how they should be trying to live to almost like this perfectionist standard and doing it in a way that they are absolutely happy about doing that. So it's not enough to do the right thing. I should enjoy doing the right thing at the same time. And I think that, you know, some of those beliefs that can wind up coming from their, you know, religion in some ways, or if that's, you know, what was the message surrounding their religion growing up as well, I think it can make that really challenging to just kind of tackle in some ways, or like kind of come to terms with, how do I keep this in my life? This is a really important part of who I am, but it also feels like it's kind of becoming a barrier at the same time.
I do feel like, you know, there's the connection between like race, culture, religion, and then like mental health, where there's a lot of like overlap or intersectionality. So, you know, you can, you know, be Black or African American, and you could have, you know, an affluent background where maybe a majority of people might expect for you to live in an urban area, you know, kind of like rough go like up, live in maybe at poverty level, or maybe a little bit above it, or maybe like middle class. And then these assumptions could actually like damage rapport, where, you know, there's definitely like a push for multicultural competence, especially like with therapists going in. And during the pandemic, there was a lot of, you know, Black Lives Matters kind of going on. And during that experience, there was also a lot of push for, you know, anyone going into treatment to work with Black or African American therapists. And it was, you know, you can identify, you know, obviously like with race, but there was also a sense of like safety there. So I even noticed, like, even before I got here, that, I got a client and they were really like hard pressed to work with someone who's black. And I was like, oh, I'm really special to you. Or, you feel really safe with me. But there was just that push. And I feel like sometimes, especially if a client presents with something that's kind of like out of your scope, like if they need like EMDR, which, I do not have a certification in, or if they need some kind of like, other that someone, a therapist from a different background or race might specialize in and give them what they need. But they feel so much desire just to work with someone who, again, they identify with. So I could see that being both a benefit, but also it could be a limitation if a client or a therapist isn't open-minded.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point because I had a client I was working with who is biracial and also figuring out his, sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
A white guy and I'm straight, but he did have a little bit of like apprehension when he came in, and even during the intake, as soon as he saw me and I mentioned like, I'm not in the community, and, he saw a white guy and all this stuff. He's like, I don't know if we're going to be, that good of a fit. And I was like, hey, give me like 3 sessions, give me 3 or 4 sessions. And then you feel like we're not a good fit, then we're not a good fit. And, we'll find something else. This guy's been rocking with me now for, I think we're going on like 7 months. And it's awesome because, I think that education is important. I discussed this a little bit in our previous podcast, but I grew up very just, I guess, like cultured. I had a next door neighbor family that was Dominican, Italian, and Catholic. So I always joke that I grew up, part Jewish, part Dominican, part Italian, because I spent a lot of time at their house. And, our families got really close and all that other stuff. Yeah. But my family has always been about inclusion. So I've had experiences, I shared with this client, again, talking about how self-disclosure can be helpful. And I shared with him, an experience that I had where, and this was when I was in high school, I think, with some of my, I have a couple of black friends, and we were driving and, whatever, and they got pulled over. And, this was the first time I kind of like recognized privilege and stuff because, I was sitting there and I was like, why are you pulling us over? There's no reason for like, why are you pulling us over? We don't need to be pulled over. Nothing happened, because truly nothing happened. And, both of my friends who were black were turning to me. They're like, Ben, shut up, be quiet, shut up, sit down, be quiet, shut up. And, that was the first time that I had to reflect on that. But by having that experience, I think it makes me that much better of a clinician in being able to connect. And I think we don't foster a lot of that amongst like young men, in people in general. You're seeing a little bit of a pushback against that right now. Diversity is kind of seen as like a bad thing right now, when I don't know, I think that's what makes us kind of stronger, and recognizing those differences helps us better understand the person next to us.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. With what you just said, so society, it kind of seems like right now that diversity may not be the best thing to some people. Do you think that generational trauma has to play a role in that? And if you do, could you guys talk a little bit more about that?
So, I can use a joke. I was with my dad. This was like last weekend or something. We have something that we identify in my family as the Shutman family curse, which pretty much all the men have a history of like a really bad temper on like the male side of the family. Like everyone has it. I even have it myself, but I've worked on reining that in over the years. But, we were in my old bedroom, and my dad, that's his practice room where he plays the flute. And I saw this old picture up on the wall from like, the 1700s or something. And I was like, man, who is that? Because that I could see like they were a Shutman. Like I could see some of the facial stuff, like even all the way back I could see. And, my dad goes, oh, that's your great, grandfather or whatever. And they played in like Russian Philharmonic Orchestra or something, blah, blah, blah. But so I bring that up because, I joked with my dad and I turned to my dad and I was like, oh, so he's the shutman that's to blame who never knew how to manage his emotions back in the 1700s. And that's why this stuff is still a problem that's living now. I think a lot of men struggle with the idea of like even accepting accepting trauma, but then even on top of that, generational trauma, because a lot of things I notice even in the men's group is that like a lot of men tend to look at their fathers as like superheroes and they hold them to this really high standard and this view. And, who am I to judge anyone's father and say your father was not a good father? I can't say that. But I can point out the general qualities that make a good father. And then that leads to some reflection. And then that causes a little bit of an identity crisis with how they view their father. Because I use this example in group where I was like, so like growing up, like let's say you got like a 70 on a test, right? And, who would you go talk to about it? Would you go talk to mom or would you go talk to dad? And so even though they, say like, oh, my dad never yelled at me. Like, so many men will be like, oh, my dad was a good dad. They never yelled at me or, anything like that. But then I ask this example and they go, oh, I talked to my mom. And I'm like, okay, well, why would you go talk to your mom? And they go, well, I don't want my dad to get mad at me. And I'm like, well, there's the point. Yeah. It does go back. And I think a lot of men struggle with that idea because it's like, I don't want to blame my parents. Like, I don't want to blame my father. And it's like, you're not blaming them, but there's a pattern there.
I think of just like the duality of it of like, look, at the end of the day, we don't have to change how you felt about your father or your parents in some way. Or by saying this, we're not like condemning them all of a sudden to be terrible people that were horrible parents. And because, everybody's families look so unique and everybody has really, really positive qualities and beautiful memories too that we've made with our families. And I think that, sometimes it's important to add that in of like, look, your relationship with them, I'm never going to know to the full extent of what that looks like.
Right.
But some of the things that you're talking about too of what were those challenges and like, how did that affect how your relationship was with dad? Or like, when dad got home from work, was there just like stress all of a sudden that like you heard him getting into the driveway all of a sudden, or, getting something home from school if you weren't doing well, like you're saying, how would both of your parents kind of treat discipline? Who was there if you needed to talk? Was anybody there if you needed to talk about something? What was really the appropriate reaction to that within your family, or not? I would say not even just within your family, but also like within the community that you grew up in too. I think that factors into it.
Where I diverge on that a little bit is that, I look at, I guess like American culture and expectations around like family. And, I think for some, I can sit here and say men, I think I can say like all people, but, saying on men, I think it's a little difficult because you're more or less taught and ingrained at you at a very young age that like, you're supposed to respect your parents and like, your parents are like saints and that like them taking care of you. Like there's always this notion that like we do it out of like the goodness of our heart as like good parents. And it's like, no. And this is a challenge I always give a lot of men is like, and again, relative to the situation, relative to the socioeconomic status, that's where I say that, we try to make these conversations a lot more simple than they actually are. But, again, relative to the socioeconomic status and everything going on in their life, like, hey, your parents putting a roof over your head, feeding you, taking you places, like, that's not really the metrics of what makes them a good parent. That's what they were supposed to do. What were you supposed to do when you came out the womb? Like, were you supposed to just start like taking care of yourself and feeding yourself and making meals and all that other stuff? And we push this notion of guilt a little bit. So we push this notion of guilt because then it's like, okay, our parents get older and we're supposed to take care of them. And, I've seen it in a lot of sessions where like, caring for a parent in itself is a stressor because they don't have that authentic relationship that would support wanting to care and be there for the parent. but they do it anyway because they feel like it's what's expected of them.
Yeah, I really
Yeah.
like that point, Ben. Just like, I guess there's so many thoughts. So I usually like talk with clients about the dichotomy of authenticity versus attachment. So ultimately, like if a child does something wrong, like they have a snack before dinner, and their parent responds to that with scolding, and let's say they stop the behavior, and then next time they do it again because kids like to push the envelope, and then the parent responds, but they say something that's very really hurtful. They call them a bad child. They say that they were really stupid for doing that.
Yeah.
And then even though if the child doesn't understand exactly what stupid or what they said, they might feel it, and they may want to say something or lash out in some way, but they avoid doing that because they do not want to sever that attachment. And a lot of times, like children look at their parents as the source of survival. I usually joke with clients and kind of say, well, hey, during that experience where you might have, again, focused more, prioritize the attachment, you probably were not in a place where you can say, hey, I don't like how this is going. I'm moving out at like 5 or 10 or 15.
Yeah.
It's like, where are you going to go? You're going to run away to the treehouse and then climb back down and then come back home. And I guess in some sense, like when it comes to generational trauma, like even if we go back to like whether it's like racial trauma or just trauma in general, or even like when we think about like slavery, for instance, and then I could think back to like with like parents and stuff like that, or even my parents who are kind of familiar with corporal punishment, and it's like, wow, you're kind of like just redoing stuff that's just so related to that. And kind of, again, this idea that you have to be proper, you have to dress a certain way, you have to be a certain way, versus, again, being authentic and having a connection with the real person.
Yeah, that authenticity I think is a big part because again, like, everything in mental health is like I talk about all the time, like it's still new. And so like, even this idea of like, looking at your parents not as superheroes, like even that in itself to a degree is like a new concept and like is not a like generally socially accepted kind of construct or concept yet. There's still like, I'd say, more or less like kind of like half the country that still thinks like, no, hitting your child and like getting angry with your child and like all that other stuff is effective. And, it creates a huge problem because I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of like agency and like kind of figuring out who they are. And like a conversation I have a lot is like, hey, with a lot of adults is like, see yourself as blah, 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 blah's son. You see yourself as blah, 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 blah's daughter. You see yourself as that. Where, you actually have to start seeing yourself as like, I'll use myself. I've seen myself as my parents' names are John and Steve. I'd see myself as John and Stevie's son. But now, because I'm an adult and I've, lived through life, like I don't really see myself as their son anymore. Like now I'm kind of Mr. Shupman. Now I'm kind of the adult a little bit. And, I think a lot of people struggle with that because the parents stay in their lives for so long and they never had that independence that it's just like you kind of said, just repeating what's always kind of been there.
It kind of made me think of that expression. It's like, oh, Mr. Passe. Oh, no, that's my father's name. Just kind of
Yeah, I had a kid call me like Mr. Shupman once, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And this was like, years ago when I was working in schools, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's my dad. And then I was like, wait, no, I'm Mr. Shupman.
That's me.
I think right now is a perfect time to just take one more sponsored break, and we will be right back. While we are taking our sponsored break, if you are listening to this, feel free to share this episode with someone who you feel like may need to listen to this, and we will be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Tree of Life Counseling Center, where people come to heal, deal, and learn to thrive. They currently have immediate availability for talk therapy and medication management with a team of over 50 licensed clinicians. Are you feeling alone? We all can use someone to talk to. Call 732-393-8391 or visit us at www.treeoflifecc.org to start your journey of self-discovery and healing today. Alrighty, and we're back. So we are just getting to the end of our episode. So before we go, I just want to ask each of you guys to speak directly to the person who's listening and just share your message. One thing that you wish they knew as a man, and one thing that you feel like they should do for their mental health.
I would pretty much say, as far as like what I kind of touched on before, like when you're expressing feelings that you may not have been in touch with before, and you're concerned about how it might come out, how it might be judged, do it almost like, do it in a way where you're expressing it and you're open to just getting it completely awkward, stumble through it, mess it up entirely, fumble the ball, so to speak. And then from there, you could just kind of grow. The first part is just kind of like breaking through and being vulnerable. This is something that, when I work with couples and I see this disconnect because the husband or the boyfriend in the relationship just has a really hard time connecting with their partner. And a lot of it is because they haven't been in touch with their feelings. Therefore, it's hard for them to understand and empathize with their partners, which causes a huge disconnect. And then they just kind of, again, like default to fixing.
Yeah, I would say that for me, the biggest thing is I think that oftentimes there's so much feedback we're getting from, what our parents were telling us, from what our friends are telling us, and from what social media is telling us, that it's really easy to lose what your own perspective is on a lot of things and what your own voice is on a lot of things. So I think my advice is just to find what you really want, separate from what everybody might want for you, or for what society is telling you is right for you, and really try to crystallize like what that is. I think that when we have conversations, it can be easy to forget that like the things that I'm saying or repeating are not necessarily my thoughts on it, but it's my dad's thoughts on this, or it's this influencer that I see on TikTok's perspective on this that I've adopted. And does that really fit for your life and the person that you're trying to be? So yeah, find what you believe about yourself and where you want your life to be going.
Yeah, so I bounce off of that, and I'm kind of gonna say what you said, but like a little different in that, and I think I said it a little bit earlier, but masculinity is whatever you want to make it. It's whatever you want it to be. Again, kind of like Ray was saying, you have so many people out there in the world right now telling you what it means to be a man. My number one person that I love to attack with all of my male clients is Joe Rogan and Elon Musk and all these people in this manosphere, because they're all sitting there and they're all telling you what it means to be a man and what you should do to be a man. And if you do this, you're going to be, you're going to get all the ladies and you're going to have a happy life and all that other stuff. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but Jimmy, Ray, me, we're all sitting here as licensed clinicians, and we're not going, hey, do this and it'll make you a man. Because I can't tell anyone how they should be a man. And we start listening to all of these echo chambers and all of these different podcasts now. It seems like there's every man has a podcast on masculinity now, and no one has expertise to talk about it. And, I'm not saying that, like, again, we're the gold standard of what it means to be a man and all that other stuff. But, like, we do have the education. We do have licenses. Like, we did learn about this stuff a little bit. So, like, if you're going to listen to this stuff, you got to find people that actually know what they're talking about. But we need to stop looking at these men, all these people, because I hate to break it to everyone out there, they're not happy men. I don't know Joe Rogan. I don't know Elon Musk. I don't know any of them personally. So how do I know that they're unhappy? When I look at masculinity, I look at Elon Musk and, on one of the breaks, we were talking about the video game thing.
Yeah.
I'd have no idea if someone is happy with their life and content with themselves and happy with their masculinity and all of that other stuff. I don't know why you would feel the need to lie about your ability in video games to impress some 14-year-olds, I don't know, halfway across the world. When I look at Joe Rogan, I don't understand why we constantly need to make a podcast and make more money and make more money and make more money and do more when we're happy with our life. Because I think that if you're happy with your life, we don't need to do more. You can want more, but there's a difference between like wanting more and being greedy. And I think that we're turning masculinity into greed. And we need to stop doing that.
I want to thank all three of you for taking the time to come on today's episode. For those of you who are listening, they are taking free time out of their day to make this episode. So again, if you really enjoyed this episode, please share this to someone that you think would benefit from listening to it. But that being said, that's a wrap on today's episode. But hopefully it's just the beginning of a bigger conversation in your own life, whether you're someone who's been holding it together or trying to be strong for someone else, or just now learning how to name what you feel. Know this, you're not alone and you never have to carry it by yourself. Healing happens when we stop pretending we're fine and start being real. So until next time, bye.